At some point in the process of becoming who you actually are, you will notice something that nobody prepared you for. You will become harder to reach. Not because you are hiding, not because you are depressed or damaged or shutting down, but because you have less and less in common with the version of yourself that needed to be found by everyone who called for you. You will notice that certain conversations no longer hold your attention the way they used to. That certain people who once consumed enormous amounts of your energy now produce almost nothing in you. Not anger, not warmth, not reaction of any kind. That the provocations which used to make you respond immediately, the dramas that used to pull you in completely, the need for approval that used to organize your entire behavior, these things have become quiet. And you will feel guilty about this. You will wonder if something is wrong with you, if you are becoming cold, if you are isolating, if the distance you feel from certain people and places and performances is a symptom of something broken rather than evidence of something built. The people around you will confirm this fear. They will say you have changed, that you are not the same, that you used to be more fun, more available, more present. What they mean, though they will never say it this way, is that you used to be easier to access, easier to affect, easier to use. Carl Jung spent decades studying what happens to a human being who undergoes genuine psychological development. What he found contradicts almost everything modern culture tells you about growth, connection, and availability. He found that the further a person moves toward genuine wholeness, the more naturally and inevitably they separate from the collective. Not as an act of rebellion, not as a defense mechanism, but as a structural consequence of becoming someone specific. By the end of this video, you will understand why the most psychologically developed people are often the hardest to reach. You will understand the 6 natural consequences of genuine inner work that make a person unreachable. And you will understand the difference between disappearing because you are wounded and disappearing because you are whole. The first thing that needs to be understood is what genuine psychological development actually does to a person. Most people imagine growth as expansion, becoming more open, more connected, more present, more available. And in certain ways, this is true. The person who has done genuine inner work becomes more present to what is real, more connected to what is authentic, more available to what actually matters. But simultaneously and inevitably, they become less available to everything else. This is the part that nobody talks about, because in a culture that prizes constant availability, immediate response, and frictionless access to other people, the natural withdrawal of a psychologically developed person looks like failure. It looks like coldness. It looks like something to be fixed. But Jung saw it differently. He observed that the human psyche begins life in a state of near-total fusion with the collective. The child does not distinguish between their own feelings and the emotional atmosphere of the room, between their own values and the values of the people who raised them, between who they actually are and who they were told to be. The entire process of becoming a self, what Jung called individuation, is the process of differentiating from that fusion, of becoming increasingly specific, of developing an interior that is genuinely your own rather than a reflection of everyone who had access to you before you were old enough to decide otherwise. And here is what differentiation inevitably produces. Distance, not hostility, not indifference in the cold sense, but a natural, structural gap between the person who has individuated and the collective they individuated from. Jung was explicit about this. He said that the development of the individual personality is always in a certain sense a deviation from the collective norm. The more complete the individuation, the more pronounced the deviation. The more pronounced the deviation, the more unreachable the person becomes to those who never left the collective. This is not arrogance. This is geometry. Two things that once occupied the same space have moved apart. The distance between them is not evidence that something went wrong. It is evidence that something went right. Jung drew a distinction that runs through everything he wrote about psychological development. The distinction between collective life and individual life. Collective life is the default. It is the life organized around shared norms, shared reactions, shared values, shared performances. It is the life that earns approval by mirroring what the collective expects to see. It is efficient, it is functional, and for most people, it is entirely sufficient. They live inside it their whole lives without once noticing the walls. Individual life, genuine individual life, begins only when a person starts to question the script, when they notice that their reactions do not always belong to them, that some of what they feel is the collective feeling through them, that some of what they want was placed there by people whose approval they were conditioned to seek. This noticing is the beginning of individuation, and the moment it begins, something changes in how the person relates to the world around them. They start to need less from it, not because they become selfish, but because they begin to develop an interior source of orientation that the collective previously provided from the outside. They stop needing the group to tell them who they are. They stop needing constant external stimulation to feel real. They stop needing conflict and drama and reaction to know they exist. And when a person stops needing these things, they naturally stop participating in them. Not through effort or discipline, simply because the appetite is gone. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity of the developed psyche to hold its own tension without needing to discharge it externally, to sit with uncertainty without immediately seeking resolution from another person, to know something without needing to announce it, to feel something without needing to perform it. This is the root of what makes psychologically developed people unreachable. They have developed an interior life sufficient to sustain them, and a person who is sustained from within does not reach outward with the same hunger that makes people easy to control, easy to manipulate, easy to access. In the next part, we go into the 6 specific consequences of this development, the 6 ways it shows up in behavior, in relationships, and in the way a developed person moves through the world. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The first consequence. They stop reacting to provocations that once controlled them. Every person has emotional triggers, points of sensitivity that when pressed produce an automatic reaction. Anger, defense, justification, collapse. For most of their lives, these triggers are invisible. The person simply reacts and calls it personality. The developed person has seen their triggers, not just intellectually, they have traced them to their origin. They know which wounds are being pressed when a certain person uses a certain tone of voice. And that knowledge changes everything. You cannot be controlled by a mechanism you can see operating. The reaction that was once automatic becomes a choice. And more often than not, the choice is silence. To everyone watching, this looks like coldness. What it actually is freedom. The second consequence. They become radically selective about who receives their attention. Jung understood psychic energy as a finite resource. Every encounter costs something. Every relationship that requires performance rather than authenticity, every conversation that goes nowhere, every environment that demands you be smaller than you are, these things drain the interior reservoir. The developed person has learned, through direct experience, what fills them and what empties them, and they organize their life accordingly. Not selfishly, simply accurately. The result is that they become very difficult to access for people who are only ever interested in what they could take. The third consequence. They stop explaining themselves to people who are not asking in good faith. There is a specific kind of conversation the undeveloped person cannot resist. The one where someone challenges them, questions their choices, implies they are wrong, and they feel compelled to justify, explain, defend, convince. as if their reality requires external confirmation to be valid. The developed person has stopped needing that confirmation. They have an interior sense of their own reasoning that does not require another person's agreement to hold. And so when someone challenges them without genuine curiosity, when the challenge is really just an attempt to destabilize, they simply do not engage. The explanation they were once compelled to give simply does not come. Not because they are above the conversation, because they have outgrown the need for it. The fourth consequence. They develop a tolerance for being misunderstood. This one is perhaps the most significant. The undeveloped person is devastated by misunderstanding. They will spend enormous amounts of energy correcting false impressions, managing perceptions, ensuring that everyone in their vicinity has an accurate image of who they are. The developed person has accepted something uncomfortable and liberating in equal measure. That being fully understood by most people is simply not available to them. Not because they are extraordinary, because they have become specific. And specific things are harder to recognize than general things. They have stopped correcting every misreading. They have stopped performing legibility for people who were never going to see them clearly. And in releasing that effort, they have recovered an enormous amount of energy that they now use for the actual business of their life. The fifth consequence. They no longer need external validation to act. The undeveloped person waits. They wait for permission, for confirmation, for someone to tell them that what they want to do is acceptable, that who they are is enough, that the direction they are moving in is the right one. This waiting is so habitual, they often do not recognize it as waiting. They call it caution. They call it humility. The developed person has built an interior compass reliable enough to act from. They make decisions from within. They move without announcement. They begin things without asking for consensus. This makes them appear confident from the outside. What it actually is self-sourced. The source has moved inward, and they no longer need the external world to power them. The sixth consequence. Their silence becomes more powerful than their words. The undeveloped person fills silence. They talk to manage anxiety, to maintain connection, to ensure they are not forgotten, to prove they are still present. Their words are often less about communication than about the relief of not being alone with themselves. The developed person has made peace with silence. They have sat in it long enough to know it is not empty. Their silence in a conversation is not absence, it is presence of a different kind. And people feel this. Without knowing why, they find the silence of a psychologically developed person more significant than the words of someone performing. This is what makes them unreachable in the deepest sense. Not because they have retreated, but because they have arrived somewhere that most people have never been. And from there, the usual methods of connection simply do not apply. Here is the distinction that matters most, because everything described above can come from two completely different places, and the difference between them is everything. There is an unreachability that comes from damage, from walls built to prevent further hurt, from a person who has been wounded so many times that withdrawal is the only way they know to stay safe. This kind of disappearing looks similar from the outside: selective, quiet, hard to reach. But from the inside, it is entirely different. It is not free, it is defended. The silence is not peace, it is armor. The selectivity is not preference, it is fear wearing the costume of discernment. The person is not unreachable because they have arrived somewhere. They are unreachable because they are hiding. Jung was very precise about this distinction. He said that genuine individuation always moves toward life, toward fuller engagement with reality, not away from it. The person who has genuinely individuated is not less present to the world. They are more present, but to a smaller, more specific portion of it. They have traded breadth for depth, volume for quality, access for meaning. The wounded person withdraws from everything because everything feels dangerous. The developed person withdraws from what is not real so they can be more fully present to what is. If your withdrawal comes with bitterness, it is a wound. If it comes with peace, it is development. If you are disappearing to punish the world for not seeing you, it is a wound. If you are disappearing because you have found something inside yourself worth protecting, it is wholeness. You are not disappearing. You are becoming specific. And specific things are not for everyone. A frequency that only certain instruments can receive is not broken. It is precise. The person who can no longer be reached by what used to consume them has not become less. They have become more themselves, more concentrated, more genuinely present to the small and real things that the noise was always covering. The people who call this coldness were counting on your availability. The people who call this arrogance were counting on your need for their approval. The people who say you have changed are right. And the change they are mourning is the version of you that was easier to access because it was easier to affect. Let them mourn it, because the version of you that is harder to reach is the version that is finally, actually, irreversibly here. Not performing, not managing, not distributing yourself in small pieces to anyone who asks. Simply present, simply whole, simply specific. And that specificity, that quiet, unhurried, unannounced arrival at yourself, is the most powerful thing a human being can become. Not because it intimidates anyone, but because it needs nothing from them. Write in the comments, "I am becoming unreachable." If something in this video named what has been happening to you, the withdrawal, the silence, the growing selectivity you did not know how to explain, I want to know you are here. Because naming it is the beginning of owning it without apology. If something in this video moved you, there is more waiting for you on this channel. You do not need to know which video to watch next. Scroll through. Something will stop you. That is not algorithm. That is recognition. I will see you there.